Many of you are already familiar with many features of Cubase, but there's one area I do want to clear up today in this quick video, and that's the difference between MIDI tracks and instrument tracks. If we right-click on the track pane, you can see that we can add both, and both of these will work and store and write and record MIDI data, right? So these are commands that we're going to be using to either trigger synthesizers like we have in the past few videos, or in the next few videos we're going to use these commands to trigger samplers. So I want to take a quick moment just to sort of illustrate some of the differences. Let's start by adding an instrument track so you can see what that process is like. So I click there, it says add instrument track, and right away you can see that it says select your instrument. So in other words, an instrument track is basically tied, it's married or just forever paired with some instrument of your choosing. So for instance, I could go down here and I could load Contact. And this is a sampler made by Native Instruments. We'll add one of them. And you can see right here, I can label it. This is my instrument track. I can't spell instrument today, but that's okay, my instrument track. That it also has this little keyboard icon. That's also how you know it's an instrument track. And we've loaded Contact, and I can go into Contact and I can load something. How about some harp? There's the harp, and I can play it. Oh, and it's so beautiful. Isn't that nice? So easy, right? So super, super easy. Well, here's the thing. This instrument track, when I record, let's do a little recording right now. I'll just play that same arpeggio. Almost the same if I didn't mess up. I have a microphone in my way, so that's kind of reaching in an awkward spot for the keyboard. But anyway, I just recorded that, and you can see, sure enough, that's MIDI data right there. I can double click on it, open it up, see it all. It's glorious, right? You can see everything that I just played. But here's the deal. Within this instrument track, it's actually taking the MIDI data, routing it to Contact, taking the audio output of Contact, and actually outputting it in this track. So it actually takes MIDI on the input and outputs audio on the output. And I have all my normal MIDI effects and equalizers and sends that I would have on any normal audio track down here. So I could say, I want to add, let's add some delay. And we'll just pick a preset. I just added delay. It's kind of a terrible sounding delay. But you get the idea. I added an audio effect to this MIDI track, which is normally something you can't do, right? MIDI data is data, it's not audio. We can't apply an audio effect to MIDI data. But again, this instrument track is allowing us to take MIDI data, transcribe it as audio, and add audio effects right there, all in the same location. And that's the real benefit of instrument tracks, right? It's all self-contained and right there, and you don't have to worry about it going anywhere. You can see everything. You can do anything you want to it. You can open up the automation tabs just like you normally would for any audio track. We haven't really talked about those in these videos yet, so if you haven't seen that yet, that's fine. But everything else is pretty much the same. It's going to work like an audio track from this point forward. Let's compare this to MIDI tracks. So first off, when you add a MIDI track, let's add another one. It just says how many, and would you like to name them? It's kind of nice. Well, I just add a MIDI track. You'll notice if I go back to the Master MIDI tab here, it's actually going to a physical MIDI port right now. So you can just see that I have my Fireface plugged in, and it's going to the physical Fireface port. So if you're using an external synthesizer or sampler that you want to connect via MIDI, or even USB via MIDI, this is the track that you need. You just need to use a MIDI track, right? So this is a track that will first of all allow you to send external of Cubase. Second, if I click here, you can actually see that I can send it to places within Cubase. And I've already loaded another version of Contact and Absinthe back here through the Instruments pane. And how we get to the VST Instruments pane is quick key F11, or you can also find it under the Devices menu under VST Instruments. And you can see that I have 64 slots here. I can load up to 64 instruments. And slot number 5 is Contact. Slot number 6 is Absinthe. Now these are just sort of running in the background behind Cubase. I've just loaded them and they're just there. And I can route stuff to them whenever I want from anywhere, or rather from almost any MIDI location. So this is unlike an instrument track in the sense that this is all self-contained, right? Contact is running inside of this track, end of story. When I load an instrument on the VST Instruments, well, it also gets its own little folder we'll say location inside of Cubase, where it will have multiple outputs. It'll let you have some extra plugin controls if the plugin supports it. And this is basically exclusively used for audio and audio automation, where your MIDI track is where you do all your MIDI work. So this is it. Number one, one disadvantage, I guess, is that it takes up a lot more space, right? If I want to now route this to Contact, that's fine. So I'm now loading a Contact, and let's open up Contact. Looks like I've loaded some double bass. And if I click on the MIDI track, I should be hearing double bass. And I'm not, which is great. Isn't that perfect? Oh, I see why. Make sure you route it to the correct channel. Right, so we were on channel 3. Make sure we put it on channel 1. There we go. There's some string double bass. And you can see when I play a note, it's triggering the MIDI input here on the MIDI track. I'm still holding the note, so it's not getting any more MIDI data unless I press really hard on the key and then it gets some aftertouch. But then it's taking this MIDI data and sending it to Contact, and here's the audio coming out of Contact. So the audio and the MIDI are actually in two different places in your project window. That's kind of cool. I mean, not immediately useful for most people if they're just starting out with a project and wanting just a basic scratch kind of pad. But wait, because there's a few other advantages. So first advantage is, let's say every note I want to play in this track, if I want to record this double bass part, let's say I wanted to double it. Maybe something as simple just as a sine wave, just to beef it up. And I've already loaded Absinthe, and it sort of has a default sine wave in it. So in an instrument track, this is very hard to do. I have to make 2 instrument tracks, load both of these into each track, and basically just copy and paste the tracks over. With a MIDI track, I don't have to do that. Instead, all I need to do is use a MIDI send. And right there, if you see this tab on our MIDI pane here, we have MIDI sends. And if it's not open for you already, you can always just right-click on this panel and select MIDI sends if you don't have it already open. And right away I can just turn on a send and say, you know what, I also want you to go to Absinthe. And you can also give it a transforming effect. So if you wanted Absinthe to happen later or at a higher velocity or somehow manipulate the data before sending it to Absinthe, you have all these different tools you can do that. I don't need to do that in this case. Let's just look. So I have MIDI 3, right? I'm taking MIDI input from my keyboard, from all MIDI inputs. It's being routed to Contact 5, and it's being routed to Absinthe. This is something you cannot do with an instrument track, where an instrument track is all self-contained, one instrument. I'm actually using a MIDI track to drive 2 different instruments, and you can hear the difference now. Right, it has that extra little boom, 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 boom. It has that extra low sine wave on the bottom. Right, if I turn that off, it's just double bass. Maybe sine wave and double bass, not the best combination, but I think you get the idea of one of the major advantages for a MIDI track. Another advantage is that this whole MIDI system, these instruments, are really quite modular. And one of the ways you can use them is I can have multiple tracks going to the same place. So I could add another MIDI track. Let's go back here, and I could route this to Contact 1 again. So I could have this track play just double bass, and whenever I wanted the double bass to play with both of them, I could write something on this track. And again, if I was doing this with instrument tracks, I would have to essentially copy and paste all the data whenever I want both of them to play, where I can actually just have a different track set up for different combinations of instruments. Or even if I don't have a combination here, even if I just take this MIDI send off, I could actually just drive the same double bass from this track, and then I could re-record and have the double bass driven again by this track. And you say, well, why would I want to do that? Well, sometimes, just in terms of how you compose and organize your own musical thinking, you want to be able to trigger maybe chords on one track and a melody on another track, but have them all playing at the same time through the same sound. And this is a great way to do that. Again, instrument tracks, everything will have to be in one track. That's the limitation. Other advantages, there was one other one. Now I'm forgetting it. What is it? MIDI tracks. Yes. So Contact is a multi-timbral and multi-channel MIDI instrument. So I can load the double bass on channel 1, and I could load maybe a solo violin on channel 2, and I just double-click and load over here. And Contact kind of loads pretty slowly when I'm recording video here because it's trying to access the hard drive, and there we go. Just takes it a little bit longer. That shouldn't be an issue for you. It should load pretty quickly if you have a fast computer. And you can see that we have a double bass on channel 1, violin solo on channel 2. So if I have a MIDI track, I can say, okay, you're going to go to contact 5, channel 1. I'll load another MIDI track. And you're going to go to contact 5, channel 2. So I've loaded 2 different sounds in the same instrument. This is pretty efficient in terms of your computer handling and organization and just all that stuff, right? So now I can play, oops, well, that's not a violin note. There's a violin note. And at the same time, I can play my double bass on this track. There you are. So I'm actually playing on 2 different tracks at the same time. Each one is going to a different place in your sampler, right? Channel 1 versus channel 2. And this gives you a lot more routing flexibility. Again, if this was an instrument track, all I could do was just have one channel of access. I wouldn't be able to, trigger double bass on channel 1 and violin solo on channel number 2. So just to sort of recap some advantages that MIDI tracks have over instrument tracks. They are much more flexible in terms of your routing. In other words, you can route multiple MIDI tracks to one place, which opens up this multi-timbral possibility. It also allows you to route the same MIDI track to multiple places, which is, I think, inherently pretty flexible. It opens up additional audio tracks and MIDI tracks for each sound that you make. So again, if you're thinking in terms of MIDI data over here and then audio mixing over here, that can work very well if you think like that. The advantages for instrument tracks is that it's all self-contained, it's a little bit easier, it's all in one place, it's a little less computer efficient, meaning your computer's gonna have to work a little bit harder to load 20 instrument tracks than it would if it had to load 20 MIDI tracks or routed to only maybe 5 instruments. So these are pretty minor details. I wouldn't freak out about this. If you just watch this video and still don't understand what I'm talking about, just use instrument tracks and you'll be okay. But when you're ready to go to that next level of really having really flexible routing within your DAW sequencer, I think MIDI tracks are, they just have the extra flexibility. And they certainly, and again, it might take a little longer for you to use or learn how to use, but the whole key is using that F11 instrument panel to load your instruments from here and then routing them from your MIDI tracks. All right, thanks guys. In the next few videos, we'll talk about samplers, particularly NI Contact.